All right, guys. So Zohran Mamdani recently went on Fox News with Martha McCallum, and this interview is amazing for two different reasons. Number one, in terms of how Zohran, I think, close to flawlessly handled all of the loaded questions that were being thrown his way. And then number two, in terms of getting an insight on where conservative media is at this point, because you would think that in the first part of this interview, which is exclusively about Israel, that this guy Zohran was running to be the mayor of Tel Aviv, not the mayor of New York City. So let's go ahead and jump in to the first part here. I'll break down why some of the questions she's asking are totally ridiculous, and then we'll get to the second clip where she is asking questions like, how will you benefit Goldman Sachs, and are you living up to the tenets of Margaret Thatcher? I wish I was kidding, but let's go ahead and jump into this first bit on Israel and Gaza.
Thank you very much for being here. Candidate for mayor of New York City, you're up by 13 points. It looks like you've got the wind at your back. You've got a big debate coming up tomorrow night with the other candidates, Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa. Obviously, New York City policy is front and center, but I would imagine that some of the big headlines recently are going to come up tomorrow night as well. So I want to get to all the policy issues in New York, but I wanted to ask you this first. If you are asked tomorrow night, if you give credit to President Trump for the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and the return of the 20 living hostages, would you raise your hand?
You know, first I want to say it's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me. And it's an honor to have this opportunity to speak to so many New Yorkers and Americans across the country. And when it comes to the ceasefire, I am thankful, and I have hope that it will actually endure and that it will be lasting. And I continue to have concerns because I've seen reports still, just this in the last few days, that 5 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli military. And that's what gives me pause about issuing any kind of praise or celebration at a moment when it is still so in its infancy. And what I will tell you is that in that same moment, it is also one that requires a focus on ensuring that that hope, that belief in a better future is one that is emblematic in our policies right here in New York City as well. And that's what we're hoping to lead with.
So would you give President Trump credit or not, to any extent? Credit or not?
I think it's too early to do so.
Too early to say.
But if it proves to be something that is lasting, something that is durable, then I think that's where you give credit.
So,
okay, we'll get to the second question here, but as he was saying, number one, in the short term, we have it's not 5 at this point. It's now up to 23 Palestinians who have been killed during this alleged ceasefire agreement. We also have simultaneously top-level Israeli finance minister Bezalel Smotrich here, who's saying there will be Jewish settlement in Gaza because without settlement, there is no security. And we've also gotten indications from Donald Trump himself saying that the IDF can resume fighting in the Gaza Strip the moment that I give the signal if Hamas, by his definition or the Israelis' definition, does not comply with the deal. So there are already many indications in the short term that this ceasefire deal might collapse and that Israel might sabotage it at any moment. I'll give you more information in terms of the allegation that Hamas is withholding the bodies of hostages here in a minute, because she asked a question about that. But again, in the short term, to give Trump credit on this, when number one, it doesn't even look like this agreement is actually going to be followed through on, and number two, Donald Trump was not some third party as a witness to this genocide, but was actively supporting and endorsing and cheerleading and sending the weapons. He was just bragging a couple days ago about how many weapons and the different kinds of powerful weapons that he sent to Israel to commit this genocide. It's like he was not a third party witness to this genocide who stepped in and ended it because he thought it was wrong. No, he was like fully and totally complicit in this genocide for months and months and months during a months-long mass starvation campaign to where a huge bulk of the population is in stage 5 famine. You don't really get credit when you were helping to do the genocide and then you say, okay, maybe we wrap it up after a certain period of time. You don't really get credit for that. But we continue here.
You've denounced Israel and the United States for the response to the slaughter on October the 7th. In fact, at times you've called it a lasting stain, the response, and at times you have left October 7th out of your statements completely around this issue. Right now, you just talked about Israelis killing some Palestinians, but Hamas is killing Palestinians within Gaza.
Those were the gangs, by the way, that she's referencing there that I showed you the video of Trump a couple days ago. He was asked about Hamas doing executions on some of the Palestinian gang members who were working with the Israelis, who were armed by the Israelis, and who were participating in looting the aid and in some cases committing outright murder. And Trump was asked about that, and he said basically he was cool with it. Now he sort of walked that back in the coming days after that because he figured out that it was the IDF who was backing those gangs. But initially, even Trump was sort of on board with Hamas and even compared it to his own versions of law and order, like what he's doing here in Washington, D.C. So interesting there, but she continues with the question.
And they have not returned the bodies that they promised to return, including 2 Americans, Itai Chen and Omer Nutra, whose families we have interviewed over these months. So what is your response to what Hamas is doing now?
I think those are bodies and remains that should absolutely be returned. And I think that I have no issue with critiquing Hamas or the Israeli government because my critiques all come from a place of universal human rights. And my focus, however, is right here in New York City and transforming the most expensive city in America into one that's affordable for each and every New Yorker.
But, okay, I want to get to that, absolutely. But do you believe that Hamas should lay down their weapons and leave the leadership in Gaza?
I believe that any future here in New York City is one that we have to make sure that's affordable for all. And as it pertains to Israel and Palestine, that we have to ensure that there is peace. And that is the future that we have to fight for.
But you won't say that Hamas should lay down their arms and give up leadership in Gaza.
I don't really have opinions about the future of Hamas and Israel beyond the question of justice and safety and the fact that anything has to abide by international law. And that applies to Hamas, that applies to the Israeli military, applies to anyone you could ask me about.
Okay. One last thought on that. You have said that you would arrest Netanyahu if he came.
Okay, we'll get to the final question on that. But a few things there. First off, notice how he's turning everything, right? Keep in mind, he's running to be the mayor of New York City. And the primary reason why he won the first primary and why he's likely going to win the general election is because he was running on affordability, right? Making it a city, as he's saying there, that, working class people can thrive in, can succeed in, and can afford to live in. That's the reason why he won the primary election, right? And so she keeps asking him questions. This is the entire first part of this interview before they throw to commercial is all about Israel, right? And so he keeps spinning it back to say, yeah, of course, I support any sort of solution, peace plan in the future that is centered on justice, that is centered on international law for both parties. That's my vision on it, whether it applies to the Israelis or Hamas or whatever. That's a good answer. Right now, in terms of the specifics, right, to the questions that Martha was asking there, in terms of the hostage dispute, because this is important, because this is what Israel is trying to use at this moment to blow up this ceasefire deal. So a couple of things on the hostages back and forth. The narrative from the Israelis is that Hamas is, for some reason, after giving up essentially the main leverage that they had in the living hostages back to Israel, they're now, for some inexplicable reason, withholding the bodies of some of the dead Israelis, right? In an effort to, I guess, sabotage the deal. Now, the reality, of course, is something that not only we were aware of, but that the Trump administration, the Israeli government, Hamas everybody was aware of this going into the deal. It was outlined as a part of the deal that they all signed off on, which is that many of the bodies that are left of the Israeli captives are buried underneath rubble because Israel bombed many of the locations of where their hostages were being held at. It's going to take time in order to be able to locate those bodies, to be able to dig them out of the rubble, to retrieve them, and then to give them back to Israel. Everybody was fully aware of that, but now the Israeli government is saying, no, Hamas is doing this intentionally, they're not abiding by the deal, etc., etc. So this is how they're going to try to blow up the deal. Now, a few things on that. Here first from Mossab. He says, did you see this? Did your favorite TV show or TV show host or news anchor speak about this today? So all 45 bodies, Palestinian bodies, arrived at the Nasser hospital with their hands and legs cuffed. The remains were being held in refrigerators in Israel and came with numbers marking on them, rather than names, according to the hospital. They say some are blindfolded, and there are signs of gunshot wounds in some cases, while others have been run over by tanks. So, as she's asking questions about the retrieval of Israeli captive bodies being returned back to Israel, you also have dozens of times more bodies that are being sent back to Gaza, right, that have been held by Israel. So Israel is holding hundreds and hundreds of Palestinian bodies, which is something that for some reason never gets brought up as a part of this conversation. And the bodies that have been returned, many of them, as they say here, are being returned blindfolded. They're in handcuffs or zip ties. Some of them have gunshot wounds. Others have been run over by tanks. We also have reports of some returning. I mean, this guy here, Mahmoud Abu Ful, has been freed from Israeli torture camps, losing one leg and both eyes. There have been numerous reports out of Israel that they've been torturing people to the point of having to do amputations on their legs, as appears to be the case in this circumstance. So these are the conditions in which even some of the living hostages have been returned back to Palestine, right? Not to mention, again, many of the bodies of the hostages, which show clear signs of widespread torture, right? And comparing that to the coverage of the Israeli hostages as well. I mean, one more thing here, Dropsite News. Footage shared with Dropsite shows refrigerated trucks and ICRC vehicles waiting at the Kisifim crossing to transport what are believed to be the bodies of dozens of Palestinians to Gaza. The current deal states that Israel will return 15 bodies of Palestinians for each deceased Israeli captive. Okay, and they're estimating that Israel is currently holding a range from 600 to 720 bodies. Think about that. How many bodies you have to have in your possession in order to do a 15-to-1 trade for the Israeli bodies that remain inside of Gaza? So think about this whenever this gets brought up in the news coverage and the kinds of questions that we were hearing from that Fox host, right? She doesn't make any mention. I'm sure she's not even aware of the hundreds and hundreds of Palestinian bodies that are being withheld by Israel. And again, this isn't a case of them, having to go and find these bodies. Israel has these bodies in their possession, and they're holding them in trucks, right? Explicitly and intentionally as leverage. And then one final thing here, we have from Haaretz, an Israeli outlet, freed after 2 years, Nimrod Cohen, one of these IDF soldiers who was captured on October 7th, told his father that food dwindled when aid was blocked in March. And after Monday's reunion, Yehuda Kodin said those responsible, primarily the prime minister, must step aside. So this is something we were reporting on as it was happening. But yeah, of course, when you impose a total siege and you block all humanitarian aid from getting into Gaza, that's going to starve not only Palestinians, but also the Israelis who are being held captive. So that coming from the family of one of the captives that was recently released. And then one more thing here from Barak Ravid. Two advisors to President Trump told reporters that they don't think Hamas has violated the agreement yet regarding the bodies of the hostages. They said there is no heavy equipment in Gaza that is needed for such a search effort, saying it's almost impossible for Hamas to reach all of the dead hostages, according to one of the advisors. So again, this narrative that's being sold right now to gin up support for continuing the genocide by the Israeli government, even members of the Trump administration are not buying it. So with that, we continue with the final question here on arresting Benjamin Netanyahu.
To the United States. You've been very outspoken in your criticism of him. Do you stand by that? You would arrest him if he came here, if you were mayor?
I've said that this is a city that believes in international law, and this is a city that wants to uplift and uphold those beliefs. The Prime Minister...
The United States doesn't stand by the International Criminal Court.
It hasn't signed the treaty for the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court, however, has issued a warrant for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu.
But what grounds in the United States could you arrest him on?
As it has for Vladimir Putin. I've said that I believe that we should uphold arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court, and that we should do so only in abiding with all of the laws in front of us. I'm not going to make a new law to ensure that we can actually do this.
Do you think that Commissioner Tisch would allow you to arrest Netanyahu in New York City?
I've appreciated Commissioner Tisch's leadership of the NYPD, and I think that she's done a good job at lowering crime across the city.
But do you think that she would go along with arresting Netanyahu in New York?
I can tell you that I'm going to exhaust every legal option in front of me, not to make new laws to do so.
Okay. It's kind of remarkable, right, how giddy this reporter is about her question there by saying that, well, the United States isn't a signatory to the ICC statutes. It's like, well, yeah, we're one of the only major countries that isn't. Maybe that's a problem. Like, maybe that's not a good thing that we don't abide by any sort of international mechanism for holding war criminals accountable, that we rejected that and said, no, we're not going to do this whole accountability thing for war crimes. We like to commit war crimes, and we like our friends even more so to commit war crimes. And so not only will we protect those friends like the IDF, but we will attack the ICC and other institutions like the International Court of Justice by attacking them, smearing them, in some cases leveling sanctions at them, as the U.S. has done multiple times against ICC officials. Like, that's not a good reflection on the United States. That's not an own to say, well, on this technicality, you couldn't arrest Benjamin Netanyahu because, haha, we don't care about war crimes. It's like, okay, I guess that's a point that you're making. So there we have Zohran in the first bit of it. Again, the entire first part of that was all on Israel You would think he's running for the fucking mayorship of Tel Aviv. No, he's running for the mayorship of New York City. So with that, let's get to the second bit here, in which they, again, talk about sort of his economic vision and how he would accomplish some of his bigger policy agenda items.
On to New York. You want to be the mayor of New York City, which, last night I chat GPT'd, where is the capitalist and global finance center of the world? And it said New York City, which made me feel good as someone who loves New York City. Is that a moniker that you're proud of and one that you want to continue for this city?
We should be proud of it, and I will also say that that's one thing you have in common with Andrew Cuomo, because he also uses ChatGPT to answer many questions, including how to actually resolve the housing crisis in this city. And
Right.
It's time that we are not only proud of us being the financial capital, the cultural capital, but also we should make it a capital of where working people can afford to live in this city. Because right now what we're seeing is that 1 in 4 New Yorkers are being priced out of the wealthiest city and the wealthiest country in the history of the world.
That's absolutely true. One of the things that's also true is that JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs have moved major operations to Texas. They've not abandoned New York, but they're hedging their bets on New York because of the increased taxes that they see coming if you become mayor. So when they do that, jobs move out of the city as well. So how does that help affordability if people in the city don't have the jobs that they once had here?
Well, I'm looking to make this a city that every person chooses, whether they're a business leader or they're someone who works for that business. And the key ways of doing that are actually delivering quality of life, public safety, and affordability for each and every person. Because what we're seeing right now is we have a broken status quo. We have a corrupt political system, and we have the politicians that sustain that. That's really what's on the ballot, is whether New Yorkers want to continue that or whether they actually want a city they can afford. That's what I'm going to deliver.
So Governor Hochul...
I mean, what kind of a question is that? I mean, it's a revealing question, so I guess it's useful in the sense that you know exactly who she works for, who she's doing this kind of a job for. It's for the JP Morgans of the world. It's for the Goldman Sachs of the world. But again, he's focused on affordability, on very simply making it a city in which the people who work there can afford to live there, right? On childcare, on healthcare, on public transportation, on whatever else the case, on housing, things like that, right? On groceries. Let's make it affordable for average working class people. And there's sort of a trap that's going on right now because Republicans are trying to posture as the party of the working class right now. And so she can't kind of just completely ditch that, but she recognizes it. She says, yeah, people are struggling. Average working class people are struggling to make it month to month right now. But what about the feelings of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, right? And keep in mind what his plan is for increasing taxes. It's not, oh, let's jack it up to 200% of whatever it is right now. He's talking about increasing the corporate tax rate just to match New Jersey's, which I think is somewhere around like 11% or something, but just to match New Jersey's corporate tax rate. And then on the individual level for millionaires, it's talking about raising it by like 2%. Okay, so let's not be all hair on fire. Everybody's going to leave the city. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, who are worth what combined? I mean, hundreds of billions, maybe even trillions of dollars combined, that they can't afford a couple percentage points here or there in order to improve the city. And by the way, how are you going to improve the city? How are you going to make it more affordable if you're not going to tax the wealthy in order to fund some social programs to uplift average working class people? You're not going to do it magically. It's not going to happen through trickle down economics, or is that sort of the still failed ideology that they're trying to push? I mean, it's just a ridiculous setup there. But again, you know exactly who she works for, right? She's doing this for the JP Morgans and the Goldman Sachs CEOs of the world.
Well, you would have to get approval from the legislature to raise individual taxes, income taxes, and also corporate taxes in New York, which you've said you would like to do in order to pay for the free buses and the free childcare and the different programs, the government grocery stores and the like. She says no new taxes in her governor's race. So what are you going to do if she won't allow taxes to be raised? How will you pay for these programs?
You know, I've said time and again that I believe these are the most straightforward ways that we can actually fund universal childcare, making buses fast and free. And I've said that the two clear ways to do so, raising personal income taxes on the top 1% by 2%, and raising the corporate tax to match that of New Jersey's corporate tax of 11.5%. Now, if there are other ways to raise this money to fund this agenda, the most important thing is that we fund the agenda. I still think that these are the most important and clear ways we can do it. And I'm thankful to have Governor Hochul's support in this race and the fact that she said we have a shared commitment to delivering universal child care for New Yorkers across the city and the state.
I think that's great. I think everybody would love to have free health care and free buses and all these things. But the question is, how do you pay for it? The city's already in debt. The governor says no to new taxes. Like Margaret Thatcher said, socialism's great until you run out of everyone else's money, other people's money.
Well, what Andrew Cuomo said is that if he had $959 million, he'd give it to Elon Musk in tax credits, because that's exactly what he did. And I bring that up to you to say that it's often a question of whether you have the willingness to spend that money to benefit working class people, not where that money is in the first place.
So what would you cut? What would you draw from to do it?
I don't think we have to cut. I've spoken about raising taxes on the wealthiest. And frankly, this is an issue that we have here in New York City, and frankly, even across this country. When I've spoken to Trump voters right here in New York City, Hillside Avenue in Queens, Fordham Road in the Bronx, they've told me it was cost of living that drove them to vote for Donald Trump. They've told me it was a promise of a lower whether it be cheaper groceries, whether it be childcare, whether it be rent.
Right.
And what we're seeing time and time again is we're more focused on the question of billionaires and the most profitable corporations than we are on people who can't even afford to make ends meet in this city.
Well, we know affordability is an issue, and I think that all politicians are getting to an understanding of that, and I think that you've done a lot, actually, to bring people's attention to that issue.
Okay, so we'll finish it off there, giving him a little bit of credit, to be fair, at the end of that he's brought attention to that as an issue, even though she's again asking questions from the perspective of the IDF, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Margaret Thatcher. Right, of all people, with that absolutely laughable quote that she just threw out of socialism is great until you run out of everybody else's money. No, that's literally what is happening right now under capitalism, is that we have such wealth disparity, such income disparity in New York City and around the country that average working class people literally cannot afford to live under this system. You have run out of other people's money, hoarding it amongst the wealthiest businesses and billionaires in this country. You're describing capitalism right now, which is the very issue that he's trying to address by creating just basic affordability programs on things like public transit and childcare and housing and groceries, right? Which again is something that she and any other, Trump, propagandists or whatever have to sort of pretend to care about at this point, because Trump is touting himself as the man of the working class. I'm going to lower prices, etc. That's probably one of the biggest reasons why he won the election, is because of inflation, because of unaffordability. Of course, he's doing absolutely nothing to address that in any sort of meaningful capacity, but that's why we have people like Zohran, I guess, to potentially actually get to the root causes of those issues. And when it comes to the Kathy Hochul stuff, it's also interesting because I believe that she's facing a political challenger from her left in her race as well. And so she feels the pressure because of the success of Zohran Mamdani to come around and endorse policies like the universal childcare one that they referenced in this interview. So I have no doubt that with Zohran's clout and his organizing ability, that he will be able to apply significant pressure on Kathy Hochul in order to get more of his agenda done. So I'll leave you guys off with that. I mean, just phenomenal job by Zohran. He really does have the charisma. He has the ability to handle himself in a contentious environment and to spin everything back to his core agenda items, his core talking points on, being, in favor of the working class and programs to uplift and to help the working class instead of just the billionaires. And even when it comes to the Israel stuff, I mean, again, spinning it back to very simple answers, whether it has to do with New York City or just international law and abiding by basic human rights standards. Zohran is doing really well, and there's a reason why he's in first place right now. So I believe that the debate, the first debate between him and Cuomo in the general election is going to be tonight. So that'll be interesting to watch. We'll have to keep track of that and see how it goes, and maybe I'll cover that tomorrow for you guys. But there you have it. Remember, like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. We're trying to make it to 100,000 subscribers right now. So yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying